The Montana wind cut through Eliza Jane Rowe's threadbare coat like 1,000 tiny knives, each gust carrying the promise of another night without shelter. She stood at the edge of Dust Hollow's main street, her weathered boots planted in the frozen mud, watching the golden light spill from windows where families gathered around warm hearths. The smell of wood smoke and cooking meat drifted through the air, making her empty stomach clench with a hunger that had become her constant companion. At 30 years old, Eliza possessed the kind of beauty that hard living couldn't quite erase. Her auburn hair, though dulled by dust and tied back with a fraying ribbon, still caught the dying light. Her green eyes, rimmed with exhaustion, held a stubborn spark that refused to be extinguished. The sun had darkened her skin to the color of autumn wheat, and fine lines etched the corners of her eyes from squinting against prairie winds. She was beautiful still, but it was a beauty marked by survival rather than softness. The stablemaster's words from that morning still rang in her ears. "Can't have you sleeping here no more, miss," old Henderson had said, not unkindly, but with the firmness of a man who'd made up his mind. "Folk are starting to talk. Bad for business, you understand." She understood. She always understood. It was the same in every town, the same suspicious glances, the same whispered conversations that ceased when she walked by. Word traveled faster than horses in these frontier settlements, and her story had already made its rounds through Dust Hollow like wildfire through dry grass. The Dusty Rose boarding house was her first stop. Mrs. Patterson, a stout woman with steel-gray hair pulled into a severe bun, didn't even let her finish her request. "We're full up," she said, though Eliza could see empty rocking chairs on the porch and dark windows on the second floor. "Besides, we run a respectable establishment here. Can't be taking in just anyone off the street." "I can pay," Eliza said quietly, her hand moving to the small leather pouch hidden in her coat pocket. $3.47, all that remained of her savings after 2 weeks in Dust Hollow. "Mrs." Patterson's expression hardened. "Money ain't the issue. Miss Rowe, your reputation precedes you. We all heard about you and that miner, living in sin without the blessing of matrimony. This is a Christian town." The words stung, but Eliza kept her face neutral. She'd learned that showing hurt only invited more cruelty. "Isaac and I don't care to hear the details." "Mrs." Patterson interrupted, already closing the door. "You made your choices. Now you'll have to live with them. Or rather, live with them somewhere else." The door shut with a finality that echoed down the empty street. The story was always told wrong, twisted in the telling until the truth was buried deeper than Isaac in his mountain grave. They hadn't lived in sin. They'd lived in love, in a small cabin Isaac had built with his own hands near the Copper Creek mine. They'd planned to marry come spring when the circuit preacher made his rounds. But the mountain had other plans, collapsing one Tuesday morning and taking Isaac and 12 other miners with it. Without a marriage certificate, Eliza had no claim to their home, no right to the man she'd loved for 3 years. Isaac's brother had arrived from Sacramento within the week, taken one look at her, and pronounced her nothing more than a kept woman. He'd given her 1 hour to gather her belongings and leave. That had been 6 months ago. 6 months of walking, of sleeping in barns and under stars, of being turned away from every decent job because unmarried women who'd lived with men were marked as surely as if they wore a scarlet letter. She tried the Imperial Hotel next, though she knew it was futile. "Mr." Garrett barely looked up from his ledger. "No room," he said simply. "Your sign says, 'No room for you. Miss, move along.'" The Methodist church was locked, its windows dark. Reverend Mills lived in the parsonage next door, but Eliza didn't bother knocking. She'd tried churches before. They offered prayers, not shelter. Even the less reputable establishments turned her away. The Silver Dollar Saloon might employ women of questionable virtue, but Big Tom Bradley made it clear she wasn't the right kind of questionable. "You're bad for business in a different way," he said, polishing a glass. "Men don't want to drink around a woman who reminds them of their sins." By the time full darkness fell, Eliza had knocked on every door in Dust Hollow that might conceivably offer shelter. The temperature was dropping fast, and she could see her breath misting in the air. Her fingers had gone numb inside her thin gloves. She walked to the edge of town, past the last flickering street lamp, past the cemetery where wooden crosses stood like silent sentinels, beyond the town limits. She spotted what she was looking for, an old barn, its roof partially collapsed, abandoned when the Hutchinson family moved back east after losing their crops to drought. The barn still smelled of old hay and mice, but it was better than nothing. In one corner, previous travelers had left a makeshift bed of straw. Eliza added to it, gathering armfuls of the musty hay, trying to build walls against the wind that whistled through gaps in the boards. She wrapped herself in her thin coat and the wool shawl that had been Isaac's last Christmas gift to her. It still smelled faintly of him, tobacco and cedar and honest sweat. She pulled hay over herself like a blanket, creating a nest that would hold her body heat through the night. Her stomach gnawed at itself. She'd eaten nothing since yesterday morning, a crust of bread given by a child who dropped it in the street and didn't want it dirtied. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. As she lay in the straw, watching stars appear through holes in the roof, Eliza thought about the woman she'd been just 1 year ago. That woman had flour on her apron and flowers on her table. That woman had mended Isaac's shirts by lamplight while he read to her from borrowed books. That woman had believed in tomorrow. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and its pack answered. The sound should have frightened her, but Eliza found a strange kinship in it. They were all just creatures looking for a place to belong, crying out in the darkness for their own kind. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine warmth, tried to remember what it felt like to sleep without fear of being discovered and driven out. In her dreams, she still had a home. In her dreams, Isaac still came through the door each evening, coal dust in his hair and love in his eyes. But morning always came, and with it, the truth that she was alone, unwanted, a woman without a place in a world that demanded women know their place. As sleep finally took her, Eliza didn't pray for rescue or redemption. She'd learned that God, like everyone else in these frontier towns, preferred to keep his distance from women like her. Instead, she simply prayed for spring, for warmer nights, for the strength to keep walking when every door remained closed. She didn't know that 3 miles away, in a modest ranch house, a man named Silas McCrae was lying awake, staring at the empty side of his bed and wondering if loneliness might be the only thing worse than death. She didn't know that fate, which had taken so much from her, was about to offer something in return. All she knew was the cold, the hunger, and the bitter truth that had become her only companion. No one lets women like her sleep indoors. Not anymore. The morning sun had barely touched the horizon when Silas McCrae found her. He'd come to check on his sheep, the small flock he kept in the lower pasture near the abandoned barn. What he found instead was a woman curled in the hay like a wounded animal, her breath misting in the cold air, frost clinging to her dark coat. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, his broad shoulders blocking the light. At 38, Silas had the build of a man who worked with his hands, tall and solid, with arms strengthened by years of wrestling cattle and mending fences. His dark hair, touched with early gray at the temples, fell across his forehead as he studied the sleeping figure. His face bore the weathered look of a man who'd spent more time with the sky than with people, and his gray eyes held a quietness that went deeper than silence. He didn't ask who she was. He didn't demand to know what she was doing in his barn. Instead, he asked the only question that mattered in that moment. "Have you eaten?" Eliza startled awake, scrambling backward in the hay, her hand instinctively moving to the small knife she kept in her boot. Her green eyes were wild with fear and exhaustion, darting between the man and the door, calculating distances and possibilities. "Easy," Silas said, holding up his hands, palms out. "I'm not here to cause trouble." She stayed crouched in the hay, ready to run, though where she would run to was a question without an answer. This your barn? It is. I'll leave. The words came automatically. She was already gathering herself, brushing hay from her coat. Did you eat? He asked again, as if she hadn't spoken. Eliza paused, caught off guard by the persistence of the question. That's not... I said I'll leave. Wasn't what I asked. They stared at each other across the dusty space. Eliza couldn't remember the last time someone had asked about her welfare without it being a prelude to preaching or proposition. The man's face was unreadable, neither kind nor cruel. Just waiting. No, she finally admitted. Not since yesterday morning. Silas nodded, as if this confirmed something he'd already known. He turned and walked to where his horse waited outside, returning with a bundle wrapped in cloth. From it, he produced a thick slice of bread, a wedge of cheese, and 2 apples that had wintered in his root cellar. He set them on a relatively clean patch of floor, then stepped back. That's for you, he said simply. Eliza's stomach clenched at the sight of food, but pride and suspicion held her back. What do you want for it? Nothing. Men always want something. Silas considered this, then shrugged. Maybe I want to eat my lunch knowing someone else ain't going hungry. That something enough? Hunger won over caution. Eliza moved forward slowly, still watching him, and took the bread. The first bite nearly brought tears to her eyes. It was fresh, probably baked yesterday, with a crust that crunched between her teeth and soft interior that tasted like heaven. She ate slowly, forcing herself not to wolf it down, aware of the man's eyes on her. He didn't leer or judge, just observed with the same calm attention he might give to checking fence posts or reading weather signs. You the woman been asking around town for work? He asked after a while. Eliza tensed. Maybe. Heard you used to live up Copper Creek way. So he knew. Everyone knew. She waited for the judgment, the sermon, the knowing look that said he'd figured out exactly what kind of woman she was. Instead, Silas said, I lost some good men in that mine collapse. Shame about that. The unexpected sympathy nearly undid her. She focused on the apple, cutting it carefully with her small knife, making it last. Cold night to be sleeping rough, he continued, almost conversationally. Supposed to get colder, too. Jim Morrison says his bones are aching, and that usually means snow. I'll manage. Didn't say you wouldn't. He shifted his weight, looked out the barn door toward the mountains. Thing is, I got a problem might benefit us both. Here it comes, Eliza thought. The proposition, the suggestion, the price for kindness. Got a ranch house about a mile west. Silas went on. Been empty since my wife passed 2 winters back. Gets lonesome, and I'm not much for housekeeping. Place is starting to look like this barn. Eliza said nothing, waiting. Could use someone to help with the cooking and cleaning. Got a spare room? Sits empty. Wasteful. Really, not much pay. But there's food and a roof. Why me? The question came out sharper than intended. Plenty of decent women in town would take that work. Maybe. Silas met her eyes directly. But decent women in town got homes of their own to tend. You need a place. I need help. Seems straightforward enough. People will talk. People always talk. Don't much care what they say. Eliza studied him, looking for the trap. Men didn't offer shelter without expecting something in return. They didn't look at fallen women with anything but desire or disgust. Yet this man's gray eyes held neither. I'm not, she began, then stopped, unsure how to finish. Not what? Not a loose woman, not for sale, not worth the trouble. Not asking you to be anything but someone who can cook a meal and keep dust from taking over, Silas said. That's all. A gust of wind rattled the barn walls, and Eliza shivered despite herself. The cheese was gone. The bread reduced to crumbs she gathered carefully in her palm. Pride was a luxury, but survival was a necessity. I'd want to see the place first, she said carefully. Silas nodded. Fair enough. Got my wagon outside. The ride to the ranch was silent, except for the creak of wheels and the steady clop of hooves. Eliza sat as far from Silas as the bench seat would allow, her few possessions clutched in her lap. The landscape rolled by, brown grass and patches of snow, fence posts marching toward the mountains, cattle huddled against the wind. The house, when it came into view, was modest but solid, built of logs and chinked with mud. It had a stone chimney sending a thin line of smoke into the gray sky. A porch ran along the front, and glass windows, a luxury in these parts, reflected the morning light. "Built it myself," Silas said, the first hint of pride entering his voice. "Took 2 years, but it's sound." Inside, Eliza could see what he meant about the housekeeping. Dust covered every surface. Dishes were stacked unwashed, and clothes lay draped over furniture. But beneath the neglect, the bones of a home remained. Hand-carved furniture, a stone fireplace, shelves that had once held a woman's treasures. "This was Mary's room," Silas said, opening a door off the main room. "Hasn't been touched since." The room was simple, a bed with a quilt, a washstand, a small window looking out toward the mountains. Dust motes danced in the shaft of light, and the air held the faint scent of lavender from sachets long dried in the drawers. "She was about your size," Silas continued. "Clothes are still in the wardrobe, if you need them. No use letting moths have them." Eliza touched the quilt, hand-stitched in a wedding ring pattern. "How did she die?" "Fever. Came on fast. Took her faster." His voice was matter-of-fact, but his eyes went distant. "Doctor said there was nothing to be done." "I'm sorry." He shrugged. "Life out here is hard on women." They stood in silence. Two people who knew loss, who understood that sometimes the world took what you loved most and left you to figure out how to keep breathing. "I'll need references," Eliza said, though they both knew she had none to give. "I'll need someone who can make biscuits that don't break teeth." Silas countered. "Seems we're both taking chances." Despite herself, Eliza felt her mouth twitch toward a smile. "I can make biscuits." "Then we have a deal." He held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she shook it. His palm was calloused and warm, the handshake firm but not crushing. As she stood in that dusty room, looking at a dead woman's clothes and a lonely man's attempt at normalcy, Eliza felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Not quite hope, she'd learned better than that, but possibility, maybe. A chance to stop running, stop sleeping in barns, stop being nothing more than a cautionary tale whispered between proper women. "When would you want me to start?" she asked. Silas looked around the neglected house, then back at her. "How about now, unless you got somewhere else to be?" "No," Eliza said quietly, setting down her bundle. "Nowhere else at all." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and whistling under the eaves. But inside, for the first time in 6 months, Eliza Jane Rowe was warm. She rolled up her sleeves, tied her hair back with more purpose than she'd felt in months, and began the work of making someone else's house into something like a home. She didn't trust the kindness. She didn't trust the man. But she trusted the cold waiting outside. And for now, that was enough. The house revealed itself to Eliza slowly, like a shy child learning to trust. Each room held echoes of the woman who had once made it a home. Mary McCrae's presence lingered in the carefully embroidered curtains, the arrangement of blue willow dishes in the hutch, the Bible left open on the bedside table to Psalms. Silas led her through the modest dwelling with an awkwardness that suggested he rarely had visitors. The main room served as both parlor and dining area, dominated by a stone fireplace that reached up to the exposed beam ceiling. The kitchen was separate, with a large cast-iron stove that radiated blessed warmth and a window overlooking what must have once been a vegetable garden. "Pumps out back for water," Silas said, gesturing through the window. "Works fine unless it freezes. When that happens, there's a well about 50 yards past the barn." Eliza nodded, cataloging the information. She'd lived in worse places, done with less. This was luxury compared to the mining camp cabin she'd shared with Isaac, where water had to be carried up from the creek and the stove smoked if the wind blew wrong. "I'll show you the rest," Silas continued, leading her down a short hallway. "My room's here." He indicated a closed door without opening it. "And this is the spare room I mentioned." The room he showed her was indeed simple but clean. The bed was made with a quilted coverlet, slightly dusty but intact. A washstand with pitcher and bowl stood in one corner, and hooks on the wall served as a wardrobe. The window looked out over the rolling prairie toward the distant mountains. "It's fine," Eliza said, and meant it. It was more than fine. It was 4 walls and a door that closed, and a bed that wasn't made of straw. Good. Silas shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with the domestic arrangements. "I'll leave you to settle in. Supper's usually around 6, but—" He gestured helplessly at the state of the kitchen. "I'll manage," Eliza assured him. "That's why I'm here." He nodded and headed for the door, then paused. "One more thing. I don't hold with locks inside the house. Never have. But this is your room now. You want to bar the door at night, there's a chair you can wedge under the handle." The implication that she might feel the need to barricade herself in hung between them. Eliza met his eyes steadily. "Thank you." Silas touched the brim of his hat and left her alone. She heard his boots on the porch, then the sound of him heading toward the barn. Only when she was certain he was gone did she allow herself to sink onto the bed, overwhelmed by the sudden change in her circumstances. She'd expected demands, requirements, suggestions of what helping with cooking and cleaning might actually entail. Instead, she'd been shown to a room, told about the water pump, and left to her own devices. Either Silas McCrae was the most trusting man in Montana, or he truly was what he appeared, a lonely widower who needed nothing more than hot meals and a clean house. Eliza didn't allow herself to dwell on it. She'd learned that questioning good fortune too closely could make it disappear. Instead, she set about exploring her new domain. The kitchen was a disaster. Dishes were piled in the dry sink, some growing things that might once have been food. The stove was caked with grease and ash. Mice had gotten into the flour bin, and something had gone wrong with a pot of beans, leaving them fossilized to the bottom of a cast-iron pot. But Eliza had faced worse. At the mining camp, she'd made meals from whatever Isaac could afford, usually cornmeal, salt pork, and occasionally wild game. She'd learned to stretch ingredients, to make filling meals from almost nothing. This kitchen, despite its current state, had good bones. The stove was quality, the larder was sizable, and through the back door, she could see a root cellar cut into the hillside. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. Water first. The pump handle was stiff from disuse, but after several tries, clear water gushed out. She filled pot after pot, setting them on the stove to heat. While the water warmed, she took inventory: salt pork in the larder, along with dried beans, flour in a tin that had defeated the mice, coffee, sugar, preserves that looked like Mary's handiwork, and various other staples. The root cellar yielded potatoes, turnips, carrots going soft but still usable, and apples wrapped in newspaper. By the time Silas returned near sunset, the kitchen was transformed. Not perfect. That would take days of work, but clean enough to cook in. The smell of baking bread filled the air, and a pot of bean soup simmered on the stove. Eliza had found Mary's apron hanging on a peg, and after a moment's hesitation, had put it on. It felt strange wearing a dead woman's clothes, but practical necessity won over superstition. Silas stopped in the doorway, his eyes widening slightly at the change. "Something smells good." "Soup and bread," Eliza said, not looking up from where she was cutting the warm loaf. "Nothing fancy. Tomorrow I'll do better once I know what you like." "This is—" He seemed at a loss for words. "This is fine. More than fine." They ate in awkward silence. sitting at opposite ends of the table that Eliza had cleared and scrubbed. She noticed Silas's hands shake slightly as he lifted his spoon, and realized this might be the first hot meal he'd eaten at his own table since his wife died. The weight of that settled between them, unspoken, but understood. "The bread's good," he said finally. "Mary used to make it with honey, when we had it." "I can do that. Is there a hive nearby?" "Was. Bears got it last summer. Been meaning to start a new one." He paused. "Been meaning to do a lot of things." After supper, Eliza expected him to linger, to want companionship or conversation. Instead, he thanked her for the meal and excused himself, saying he had evening chores. She watched through the window as he walked to the barn, his broad shoulders hunched against the cold wind. Alone again. She cleaned the dishes and set the kitchen to rights for morning. The work was familiar, soothing even. She'd done this countless times for Isaac, creating order from chaos, making wherever they lived feel less temporary. But this was different. This was another woman's kitchen, another woman's patterns still evident in how the dishes were arranged, where the everyday linens were kept versus the good ones. Eliza found herself trying to honor those patterns, to slip into the existing rhythm rather than impose her own. Night fell hard and fast on the prairie. Eliza lit a lamp and made her way to the spare room, her room now, though she couldn't quite think of it that way yet. The bed was softer than anything she'd slept on in months, the quilts warm and smelling faintly of cedar from the chest where they'd been stored. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house, boards settling, wind rattling windows, the distant lowing of cattle, normal sounds, safe sounds, not the threatening creak of a barn door or the scurry of rats over her feet. Somewhere in the house, she could hear Silas moving around, his footsteps careful as if trying not to disturb her. The consideration in that small gesture, a man being quiet in his own home for the comfort of a stranger, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She'd been surviving for so long. She'd forgotten what simple kindness felt like. The suspicion was still there, coiled in her chest like a snake ready to strike. Men didn't give without taking. The world had taught her that lesson thoroughly. But tonight, she was warm. Tonight, she was fed. Tonight, she had a door she could close and a bed that didn't rustle with straw. If there was a price to be paid later, she'd face it then. For now, she pulled Mary McCrae's quilts up to her chin and allowed herself the dangerous luxury of feeling safe. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There would be more cleaning, more cooking, more careful navigation of this strange arrangement. There would be moments when Silas looked at her and saw not a housekeeper, but a woman with a past. There would be tests of trust and boundaries yet to be established. But tonight, for the first time in 6 months, Eliza Jane Rowe slept indoors, in a bed, in a room with walls that kept out more than just the wind. And if she dreamed of Isaac, of the life they'd planned that the mountains stole away, at least she dreamed in warmth. In the morning, she'd make biscuits. Real ones, light and fluffy. Nothing like the hardtack Silas had probably been choking down. She'd make them because that's what she'd been hired to do, but also because somewhere in this strange, awkward beginning, she sensed the possibility of something she'd thought lost forever, a place where she could stop running, stop apologizing for existing, stop being nothing more than her worst mistake. It wasn't home, not yet, maybe never. But it was a start. The days settled into a rhythm as natural as breathing, though Eliza remained watchful for the moment when kindness would reveal its price. A week passed, then 2, and still Silas asked nothing of her beyond what he'd promised, meals and housekeeping. He left early each morning to tend his cattle and returned at dusk, tired and grateful for hot food and clean clothes. It was during the 3rd week, while mending one of his shirts by lamplight, that Eliza finally began to speak of her past. The words came haltingly at first, like water through a dam with tiny cracks. "This reminds me of evenings with Isaac," she said, her needle pausing mid-stitch. "He'd read aloud while I sewed. He loved books, spent half his wages on them when he could. Silas looked up from the harness he was repairing. They'd taken to sharing the evening hours in the main room, working in companionable silence. What kind of books? Everything: adventure stories, poetry, even medical texts when he could find them. He wanted to be more than a miner. She smiled sadly at the memory. Said the mountain was just a means to an end. We were saving for a little shop in San Francisco. Books and notions. Maybe a lending library. Sounds like a good dream. It was. The needle resumed its path through the fabric. We had it all planned out. The wedding in spring when the circuit preacher came. The trip west after we'd saved enough. The children we'd have once we were settled. She could feel Silas watching her, but he didn't interrupt. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. 3 years we lived together in that cabin. Eliza continued, her voice steady despite the pain of remembering. Everyone in the camp knew us as a couple. Some of the wives even invited me to their quilting circles, but without a piece of paper saying we were married. She shrugged. None of it counted when the mountain took him. His family? Silas asked quietly. His brother came from Sacramento. Marcus. Hadn't seen Isaac in 5 years, but he was listed as next of kin. The bitterness crept into her voice despite her effort to contain it. He took one look at me and decided I was unsuitable, called me terrible things, said I'd corrupted his brother, led him into sin. She set down the mending, her hands trembling slightly. I tried to explain, showed him the letters Isaac had written about our plans, the money we'd saved together. Marcus took the money, said it was family property, gave me 1 hour to pack my personal belongings and leave. When I protested, he threatened to have the sheriff arrest me for theft. That's not right, Silas said, his jaw tightening. Right doesn't matter much when you're a woman without legal standing. Eliza picked up the shirt again, needing something to do with her hands. I took what I could carry and left. Thought I'd find work in another mining town, but word travels fast. The fallen woman from Copper Creek, that's what they called me. Doors started closing before I could even knock. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of injustice. Finally, Silas spoke. You didn't do anything wrong. Didn't I? Eliza met his eyes across the room. I lived with a man without marriage, shared his bed, kept his house, planned a future that was never sanctioned by God or law. Every preacher from here to California would say I got what I deserved. Preachers say a lot of things. Doesn't make them true. You're a strange man, Silas McCrae. Maybe I just know that being poor doesn't make someone bad, and being hurt doesn't mean you deserved it. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them away. She'd cried enough tears to fill Copper Creek. She wouldn't waste more on what couldn't be changed. What about you? She asked, deflecting attention from her own pain. How did you meet your wife? Silas leaned back in his chair, a faint smile softening his weathered features. Mary was the schoolteacher in Billings. I was hauling lumber for the new schoolhouse. Took me 3 months to work up the courage to speak to her, and when I finally did, I knocked over a stack of boards and nearly crushed her foot. Despite everything, Eliza found herself smiling. Smooth courtship. About as smooth as sandpaper, but Mary was patient, said she liked that I didn't talk just to hear my own voice. His expression grew distant. We had 8 good years, no children. God didn't see fit to bless us that way, but we were happy. How did she die? Eliza asked softly, though she'd already heard the basic facts. Scarlet fever. Went through the valley like wildfire that winter. I wanted to fetch the doctor from Dust Hollow, but she wouldn't let me leave. Said if it was her time, she'd rather I be with her than riding for help that wouldn't come in time anyway. He rubbed his face with one calloused hand. She was right. Doctor said later there was nothing he could have done. Still wonder sometimes if I should have gone anyway. You stayed with her. That's what mattered. Maybe. He stood abruptly, clearly reaching the limit of emotional disclosure he could handle. I should check on the stock. Storm feels like it's building. After he left, Eliza finished the mending and prepared for bed. The house felt different now, charged with the ghosts they'd summoned through memory. She understood better why Silas lived the way he did, not from inability to care for himself, but from the paralysis that came with loss. Every clean dish, every swept floor was a reminder of the woman who should have been doing these things. She was wiping down the kitchen table when she noticed it. A piece of paper tucked behind the flour canister. Pulling it out, she found a recipe written in a feminine hand. "Mary's Sunday Biscuits," it read at the top, followed by careful instructions. At the bottom, a note. "Remember, love is the most important ingredient." Eliza traced the words with one finger, thinking of the woman who had written them. Mary McCrae had been loved, married, respected, everything Eliza wasn't. Yet here Eliza stood in Mary's kitchen, wearing Mary's apron, living the life that death had interrupted. She folded the recipe carefully and put it back where she'd found it. Tomorrow she'd use it to make breakfast. Not because she wanted to replace Mary, that was impossible, but because somewhere between her own loss and Silas's grief, they'd found an arrangement that worked. Not love, not family, but something, survival, maybe. Or just two wounded people learning that sharing space was easier than being alone. That night, as she lay in bed listening to the storm Silas had predicted roll across the prairie, Eliza thought about the different kinds of women the world recognized. There were good women like Mary, who did everything right and died anyway. There were fallen women like herself, who loved unwisely and paid the price. And there were the women in between, the ones who survived however they could, walking the narrow line between respectability and ruin. She thought about Silas's words. Being poor doesn't make someone bad. It was such a simple statement, yet it stood against everything she'd been told since Isaac died. Every turned back, every closed door, every whispered condemnation had carried the same message, that her poverty was proof of her sin, that her need for shelter was somehow shameful. But Silas had looked at her and seen just a person who needed help, not a fallen woman or a cautionary tale, just someone caught between winter and nowhere. The gift of that, of being seen as human rather than symbol, was almost too much to bear. The wind howled outside, driving snow against the windows. But inside, the house was warm and solid. Eliza pulled the quilts higher and closed her eyes, allowing herself to imagine, just for a moment, that this could last, that she could wake tomorrow and make biscuits from a dead woman's recipe, mend clothes and tend house, and slowly build something like a life from the ashes of her old one. It was dangerous to hope. She knew that. Hope was what had led her to trust Isaac's brother, to believe the world might show mercy to a woman alone. But as sleep finally took her, Eliza couldn't quite stop herself from hoping anyway. Not for love or redemption or even forgiveness, just for the simple grace of being allowed to stay. Spring arrived slowly on the Montana prairie, revealing itself in small mercies. A day without frost, the first green shoots pushing through dead grass, the return of birdsong at dawn. With it came a transformation in the McCrae Ranch that had nothing to do with seasons and everything to do with the quiet revolution of daily care. Eliza had been there 3 months now, long enough that the rhythms of the house had become second nature. She knew which floorboard creaked in the hallway, how to coax the temperamental stove damper, where Silas kept his second-best boots when he thought he'd lost them. She'd learned his preferences without asking: coffee black as midnight, beef cooked through, no sugar in his cornbread. More surprising was how the house had learned her. Her morning routine now included feeding the chickens Silas had bought without explanation, saying only that fresh eggs would be nice. Her sewing basket had migrated to the spot by the window with the best light. A shelf in the kitchen now held the herbs she'd gathered and dried chamomile for tea, willow bark for headaches, mint for digestion. Between 2 cups of coffee on a mild Tuesday morning, their strange partnership found its definition. "This came for you," Silas said, producing a package wrapped in brown paper. "Mail rider brought it yesterday, but I forgot till now." Eliza set down her mending, puzzled. "For me, Nobody knows I'm here. Martha at the bakery knows. Mentioned you were helping out here when the rider asked. He set the package on the table, then busied himself with his coffee, giving her privacy. Inside the paper was fabric, good cotton in a practical brown, enough for a dress. A note in careful handwriting read, "Thought you might need this. Credit at the store is arranged if you need thread and notions. M." Eliza stared at the gift, unable to speak. Martha barely knew her, had no reason to show such kindness. Yet here was proof that someone in Dust Hollow saw her as more than scandal and shame. "That was kind of her," Silas observed, glancing at the fabric. "I can't accept this. It's too much." "Why?" "Because—" Eliza struggled to articulate the weight of obligation, the fear of owing anyone anything. "Because kindness always has a price." Silas was quiet for a long moment, then said, "Maybe the price is just seeing someone else do well. Martha lost a daughter a few years back. Fever took her. Girl would have been about your age now." The information reframed the gift entirely. Not charity for the fallen woman, but a mother's impulse to care. Eliza touched the fabric gently, already envisioning the dress she'd make, practical, modest, but hers. "I'll bake her something," she said finally. "A pie, maybe when the berries come in." She'd like that. They returned to their morning tasks. But something had shifted. The boundaries of Eliza's world had expanded slightly, incorporating the possibility that Dust Hollow might not be uniformly hostile after all. Later that afternoon, as Eliza worked in the garden plot she'd convinced Silas to let her restore, she heard horses approaching. 2 riders appeared on the ridge. Silas and another man she didn't recognize. They were deep in conversation, gesturing toward the lower pasture. She was hanging laundry when they rode up to the house. The stranger was younger than Silas, with sandy hair and an easy smile that faltered when he saw her. "Tom, this is Miss Rowe," Silas said simply. "She's helping with the house. Eliza, this is Tom Bennett from the Double Bar Ranch." Tom touched his hat politely, but his eyes held questions. "Ma'am, didn't know you'd hired help?" "Silas." "Lot of things you don't know," Silas replied mildly. "You staying for supper?" "Can't. Promised Sally I'd be home before dark." Tom's gaze flickered between them, clearly trying to work out the arrangement. "Just wanted to let you know about the spring roundup plans." After he left, Eliza could feel the change in atmosphere. Word would spread now. The hermit rancher had a woman living in his house. The speculation would be inevitable. "I could eat in the kitchen," she offered as she served supper. "If you have company again." Silas looked up sharply. "Why would you do that?" "To avoid questions, to protect your reputation." "My reputation?" He set down his fork. "I'm a man living alone who hired help. Nothing scandalous in that. You eat where you please, but don't hide on my account." The fierceness in his tone surprised her. She'd grown so accustomed to being hidden away, to being the shameful secret, that open acknowledgement felt foreign. "People will assume things," she warned. "Let them. Their assumptions don't change the truth." "And what is the truth?" Silas met her eyes steadily. "Truth is, you work hard, cook good food, and keep the house cleaner than it's been since Mary died. Truth is, I sleep better knowing someone else is here, that the house isn't empty except for ghosts. Truth is, we're 2 people making the best of things. Anyone who wants to make more of it than that can go to hell." The profanity, mild as it was, startled a laugh from Eliza. She'd never heard him curse before. "I mean it," he continued. "You've done nothing to be ashamed of. Not here, not before. I won't have you acting like you have." That night, as she prepared for bed, Eliza found herself humming an old hymn her mother used to sing while kneading bread. She caught herself and stopped, surprised by the impulse. Music had belonged to her old life, to mornings in Isaac's cabin when the future stretched bright before them. She hadn't felt like singing since the mountain fell. But something was thawing inside her, like the ground after winter. Not happiness, exactly. That seemed too ambitious. But contentment. Maybe. The simple satisfaction of useful work. Of being needed without being used. She thought about Tom Bennett's face. The calculations she could see him making. By week's end, everyone in Dust Hollow would know Silas McCrae had taken in the fallen woman from Copper Creek. The story would grow in the telling, twisted into something sordid or scandalous. Once, that would have sent her running. The weight of judgment, the whispered condemnations, the knowing looks. They'd driven her from 3 towns already, but running required somewhere to go. And Eliza had learned the hard way that nowhere was safe from the past she carried. Besides, Silas was right. Their truth was simpler than any story the gossips could invent. 2 damaged people sharing space, trading work for shelter, company for solitude. If others wanted to paint it with darker colors, that was their choice. She picked up the fabric Martha had sent, running her hands over its sturdy weave. Tomorrow she'd ride into town with Silas when he went for supplies. She'd walk into the general store with her head up and buy thread. She'd thank Martha in person for the gift. She'd face the stares and whispers and judgment, not because she was brave, but because she was tired of running. The moon rose full and bright, flooding her small room with a silver light. Somewhere in the house, she could hear Silas moving around, the comfortable sounds of another person existing in shared space. Not family, not romance, but something uniquely theirs, a partnership born of necessity but sustained by choice. Eliza folded the fabric carefully and set it aside. Tomorrow she'd begin cutting out the dress. She'd make it well, with strong seams and careful stitches, built to last through seasons of hard work. It would be the first new dress she'd had since Isaac died, the first thing that truly belonged to this new life she was building one day at a time. Outside, a coyote called to the moon, its cry carrying across the empty prairie. But inside the house, 2 people who'd learned too much about loss were discovering that survival was easier when you didn't have to do it alone. It wasn't the life either of them had planned, but it was life nonetheless. And that was more than either had dared hope for in the dark months before. Eliza closed her eyes and let sleep take her, no longer afraid of what morning would bring. She had work to do, bread to bake, a garden to tend. She had a place to be, and someone who expected her to be there. For now. That was enough. For now. That was everything. The gossip arrived with the first warm winds of May, carried into town like pollen that made everyone sneeze and whisper. Tom Bennett had done his work well within a week. Every soul in Dust Hollow knew that Silas McCrae had a woman living at his ranch. The story grew with each telling, embellished like a quilt with too many patterns. Eliza first felt its weight during her trip to Hobson's general store. Conversations ceased when she entered, replaced by a silence thick enough to cut Mrs. Hobson, usually chatty as a magpie, served her with lips pressed thin as paper. "That'll be $2 for the thread and notions," she said, not meeting Eliza's eyes. "Thank you." Eliza counted out the coins carefully, aware of the other women in the store watching from behind displays of canned goods and fabric bolts. As she turned to leave, she heard the whispers start before the door even closed behind her. Oh, living in sin, bold as brass. Poor Mary must be rolling in her grave. Always knew Silas McCrae would come to no good after his wife died. Eliza kept walking, her back straight despite the words pelting her like stones. She'd endured worse in other towns, but somehow it cut deeper now. For 3 months, she'd allowed herself to believe she might have found a place to belong. The gossip was a harsh reminder that the past followed like a shadow, no matter how far you ran. At the bakery, Martha looked up from her breadboard with a warm smile that faltered when she saw Eliza's expression. "Heard the hens clucking." "Have you?" Martha asked, her tone gentle. "Thank you for the fabric," Eliza said, not trusting herself to say more. Martha wiped her floury hands on her apron and came around the counter. "Don't you pay them any mind. Small towns got small minds sometimes. They'll find something else to chatter about soon enough." "Will they?" Eliza's voice was bitter. "In my experience, A woman's reputation, once lost, stays lost. Maybe, but reputation and character aren't the same thing. Martha packed a loaf of fresh bread into Eliza's basket without being asked. I've known Silas McCrae for 10 years. He's a good man who deserved better than to die alone out there. If he's found some comfort in your company, that's between him and the Lord. The unexpected defense brought tears to Eliza's eyes. She blinked them away, mumbling her thanks, and fled before her composure cracked entirely. The ride back to the ranch seemed longer than usual. Silas was working the far pasture and wouldn't be back until sunset. Eliza was grateful for the solitude as she unpacked her purchases and tried to push away the morning's humiliation. But the poison had been planted. Over the next weeks, it spread through their carefully constructed routine like a disease. The minister, Reverend Josiah Mills, paid an unexpected visit on a Thursday afternoon. Eliza saw him coming up the road and considered hiding, but pride kept her at her work in the garden. She was weeding the bean rows when his shadow fell across the plants. "Miss Rowe." His voice held the particular tone of righteous disapproval she'd come to know well. "Reverend." She didn't look up, continuing to pull weeds with focused determination. "I've come to speak with Mr. McCrae about his situation. He's checking the cattle in the north pasture. Won't be back for hours." "Perhaps that's providential. It gives us a chance to talk." The Reverend cleared his throat. "I'm concerned about your immortal soul, Miss Rowe." Now she did look up, shading her eyes against the sun. "Are you living as you are, without the sanctity of marriage, in a house with a man who isn't your husband?" "I'm his housekeeper," Eliza interrupted. "I cook, clean, mend clothes. That's all." "Nevertheless, the appearance of impropriety. Is that what brings you out here? Reverend, the appearance of things." Eliza stood, brushing dirt from her apron. "Where was your concern for my soul when I was sleeping in barns, when I was begging for work and being turned away from every door in town?" The minister's face reddened. "That's hardly relevant, I think it is." Years of suppressed anger gave her words an edge sharp enough to cut. "You want to save my soul? Where were you when I needed saving from freezing to death? Silas McCrae gave me work and shelter when good Christian folk like you wouldn't even look me in the eye." "Your past choices." "My past choices were to love a man who loved me back, to build a life with him, to plan a future that God saw fit to bury under a mountain." Her voice shook now, but she couldn't stop. "My sin, Reverend, was being too poor to force a traveling preacher to come sanctify our union before the mountain took him. That's all. That's my great fall from grace." Reverend Mills shifted uncomfortably. "Be that as it may, your current arrangement is honest work for honest pay. If you see more than that, perhaps the sin is in your mind, not my actions." She turned back to her garden, dismissing him with a gesture. After a moment, she heard his boots on the path, then his horse riding away. When Silas returned that evening, she told him about the visit. His face darkened like a storm cloud. "He had no right," Silas said quietly. "He had every right. He's a minister. Saving souls is his calling." Eliza set his supper before him with hands that trembled slightly. "Maybe I should go." Silas's head snapped up. "What?" "Your reputation." "To hell with my reputation." The words came out fierce and sudden. "You think I care what Josiah Mills thinks? What any of them think?" "You should care. This is your home, your community." "No." Silas pushed back from the table, standing abruptly. "This is my land, my house, my life. I decide who's welcome here. Not Mills, not the gossips in town, not anyone but me." He walked to the window, staring out at the darkening sky. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter but no less firm. "I was dying here, Eliza. Maybe not in body, but in every other way that counts. This house was a tomb, and I was just waiting to join Mary in the ground. Then you came along, and suddenly there was a reason to wake up, someone to talk to at supper, fresh bread in the morning, life in these walls again. He turned to face her. If they want to make that into something ugly, that's their failing, not ours. You're staying, unless you want to go. The question hung between them, weighted with more than just the immediate issue. Eliza thought of the poisonous whispers, the judgment that would only grow worse. But she also thought of mornings in the kitchen, evenings by the fire, the slowly healing wound of her grief in this quiet place. No, she said softly, I don't want to go. Then that settled. But it wasn't. Not really. The next Sunday, Silas did something that set the entire town talking. He attended church for the first time since Mary's funeral, and he brought Eliza with him. You don't have to do this, she whispered as they approached the small white building. Yes, I do. He offered her his arm, a gesture of public support that would be impossible to misinterpret. They want to judge. Let them do it to our faces. The congregation fell silent as they entered. Silas led them to his family pew, the one that had sat empty for 2 years. Eliza could feel every eye upon them, could hear the sharp intake of breath from the proper matrons, the muttered disapproval from the men. Reverend Mills faltered in his greeting, clearly unprepared for this development. But he recovered, launching into a sermon that seemed pointed in its emphasis on sin and redemption, on the dangers of temptation and the importance of propriety. Silas sat through it all like granite, his presence a silent challenge to anyone who might question his choices. Eliza kept her eyes forward, her hands folded, drawing on every ounce of dignity she possessed. When the service ended, most of the congregation hurried past them without acknowledgement. But a few, Martha, Tom Bennett's wife, Sally, old Jim Morrison, stopped to exchange pleasantries. Small gestures, but meaningful in their defiance of the general disapproval. As they rode home, Eliza finally spoke. Why did you do that? Because hiding suggests we have something to hide. We don't. Silas kept his eyes on the road ahead. Because you deserve to walk down any street, enter any building without shame. Because I'm tired of people thinking their whispers matter more than truth. That night, for the first time since arriving at the ranch, Eliza wept. Not from sadness or fear, but from a gratitude so overwhelming it couldn't be contained. She'd been defended, publicly claimed as worthy of respect. After months of being society's cast-off, someone had stood up and said her presence mattered. The tears were healing, washing away some of the bitter residue of judgment and shame. When they finally stopped, she felt cleaner somehow, more whole. The gossips would continue their chatter. Nothing could stop that. But their words had lost some of their power, deflected by the simple armor of one man's stubborn integrity. Tomorrow there would be more whispers, more speculation, more righteous indignation from those who confused propriety with virtue. But tonight, in this house where 2 wounded people had built something like a life, there was peace. And for Eliza, who had forgotten what it felt like to be championed, that was more than enough. The change came gradually, like spring ice melting on a pond, first around the edges, then spreading toward the center until everything was different. It started with small things. Silas began lingering over breakfast, asking about her plans for the day. He brought wildflowers from the meadow, claiming they were for the table, but always placing them where she worked. His eyes followed her movements with something warmer than mere appreciation for her housekeeping. For her part, Eliza found herself listening for his footsteps on the porch, timing the bread to come out of the oven just as he returned from morning chores. She caught herself humming while she worked, not the sad ballads of loss, but lighter melodies that matched the rhythm of her contentment. It was a Tuesday evening in late June when the careful balance finally shifted. Eliza was working on the dress made from Martha's fabric, holding it up to check the hem by lamplight. The summer heat had driven them to leave windows and doors open, inviting in the sweet smell of prairie grass and the distant sound of crickets. You sew like everything can be mended, Silas said from his chair across the room. He'd been pretending to read the week-old newspaper, but she'd felt his attention on her for the past hour. Eliza paused, needle suspended. Most things can be with patience. Not everything. His voice carried a weight that made her look up. Some things, once broken, stay that way. Are we talking about fabric? Silas. He set down the paper, his gray eyes serious in the lamplight. No, I don't think we are. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken possibility. Eliza carefully folded the dress, buying time to steady her suddenly racing heart. I've been thinking, Silas continued, each word careful as footsteps on thin ice. About names. How you call me Mr. McCrae half the time, like we're strangers. We're not strangers anymore, are we? No, she agreed softly. We're not. Then maybe you could just call me Silas, and maybe... He paused, gathering courage like a man preparing to jump across a creek. Maybe I could call you Eliza, instead of Miss Rowe. Such a simple thing, the use of given names, yet they both knew it meant crossing a line they'd drawn that first day, when survival mattered more than sentiment. To use first names was to admit they were more than employer and housekeeper, more than two people sharing space out of necessity. I'd like that, Eliza whispered, then, testing it out, Silas. His name on her lips seemed to break something loose in him. He stood abruptly, crossing to the window, as if the room had suddenly become too small. Eliza, I need to tell you something, ask you something, but I'm no good with words, never have been. She waited, hands folded in her lap to keep them from trembling. These past months, he began, still facing the window, I've watched you bring this house back to life, watched you work with those steady hands, making everything better just by tending to it. But it's not just the house you've mended. He turned then, and the raw honesty in his face took her breath away. I was ready to die, Eliza, not by my own hand. Nothing like that, just ready to fade away, like smoke from a dying fire. Then you showed up in my barn, all fierce pride and hidden hurt, and suddenly I had a reason to keep the fire burning. Silas. Let me finish, please. He came closer, stopping just out of reach. I know what people think, that I took advantage, that there's something improper about our arrangement. But the truth is, you saved me as much as I helped you, maybe more. Eliza stood, her sewing forgotten. You gave me shelter when the world turned its back. That's no small thing. I gave you what anyone with decency should have given, a chance. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, fighting some internal battle. But somewhere along the way, I started wanting to give you more. Not out of pity or charity, but because the word came out barely louder than breath. Because you've become the first thing I think of when I wake and the last before I sleep. Because this house feels empty when you're not in it. Because I'm a fool who's falling in love with a woman who has every reason to never trust a man again. The words hung between them like stars suddenly made visible. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes, but for once they weren't born of sorrow. You're not a fool. Silas McCrae. No. She took a step closer, close enough to see the hope and fear warring in his eyes. A fool would have let me freeze in that barn. A fool would have cared what the gossips said. A fool wouldn't have stood up in church and claimed me as worthy of respect when the whole town wanted to shame me. Eliza. Her name was a question and a prayer combined. I'm not good at being still, she said, echoing words from weeks past. Isaac used to tease that I moved like I was always ready to run, and maybe I was. Maybe I knew somehow that happiness was temporary, that I'd need to be ready to leave when it ended. She reached out, her fingers barely brushing his hand. But I don't want to run anymore. Silas, for the first time since the mountain fell, I want to stay. Not because I need shelter or work, but because you make me remember what it feels like to be seen as more than my worst moment. You are more, so much more. His hand turned to catch hers, work-roughened fingers gentle as they intertwined. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I know trust comes hard after what you've been through. I needed you to know. in case you were thinking of leaving." "I'm not leaving." The words came out fierce and certain. "This is my home now. You made it my home when you defended my right to be here, when you trusted me with your grief, when you looked at me and saw a person instead of a scandal." "Then stay," he said simply. "Not as my housekeeper. Stay as whatever you want to be, whatever you're ready to be." Eliza looked at their joined hands, at the lamplight casting gentle shadows, at this good man who'd offered her dignity when the world offered only judgment. She thought of Isaac, of the love they'd shared and lost. That love had been young and bright, burning fast like pine in a fire. What she felt stirring for Silas was different, deeper, slower, like oak coals that would warm a house through the longest winter. "I want to stay as someone who makes your mornings worth waking up for," she said finally. "As someone who tends this home not from duty but from choice. As someone who's learning that not all love stories end with mountains falling." "Is that what this is, a love story?" She smiled then, the first real smile he'd seen from her, not the polite expression she wore for town, but something true and unguarded. "I don't know yet, but maybe we could find out slowly, carefully, without rushing toward heartbreak." "I'm a patient man," Silas said, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "Waited 2 years to start living again. I can wait as long as you need." "What if the town can gossip itself hoarse, won't change what's true between these walls?" They stood there in the lamplight, hands clasped, hearts cautious but hopeful. Outside, the summer night sang with possibilities, crickets and owl calls and the whisper of grass in the wind. Inside, two people who'd learned too much about loss were taking the first tentative steps toward something that might, with time and tending, grow into joy. "I should check the stove," Eliza said eventually, though she made no move to pull away. "It can wait." Silas's free hand came up to touch her face, the gesture so gentle it nearly undid her. "I just want to remember this. The first time you smiled at me like I wasn't just someone giving you shelter." "You were never just that," she admitted. "Even when I tried to make it simple, you were never just that." They parted eventually, returning to their evening routines, but with a new awareness crackling between them. When Eliza bid him good night, she used his given name again, savoring the intimacy of it. When he replied, her name on his lips sounded like a promise. That night, Eliza lay in bed, the bed she'd no longer thought of as belonging to a stranger, and allowed herself to imagine a future beyond mere survival. Not the grand dream she'd shared with Isaac, full of city lights and bookshops. Quieter dreams this time. Morning coffee shared in comfortable silence. Evenings by the fire. Seasons turning over land they tended together. She was learning that love could come more than once in a lifetime, that the heart's capacity for connection wasn't limited by loss. What she felt for Silas didn't diminish what she'd had with Isaac, any more than spring flowers diminished the memory of last year's blooms. Different seasons, different loves, but all of them real. Tomorrow would bring its challenges. There would be more gossip, more judgment, more tests of the fragile trust they were building. But tonight, Eliza Jane Rowe, no longer defined by her losses, fell asleep with a smile on her lips and hope in her heart. For the first time in over a year, she wasn't just surviving. She was beginning to live again. The smoke was visible from 10 miles away, a dark column rising into the August sky like a fist shaken at heaven. Eliza saw it first from the garden, where she'd been harvesting the last of the summer beans. The basket fell from her hands as she recognized the direction west, toward the old mining land where Silas had invested in timber stands. "Fire!" The word tore from her throat as she ran toward the barn where Silas was mending harnesses. "There's fire in the west." He emerged quickly, shading his eyes against the afternoon sun. His face went grim as he spotted the smoke. "That's near my timberland, maybe on it." Within minutes, they were in the wagon, racing toward town. The relationship between them had deepened over the past weeks into something tender but still unnamed, marked by lingering glances and hands that found excuses to touch. But all of that fell away in the face of potential catastrophe. Dust Hollow was in chaos when they arrived. Men were loading wagons with barrels of water, shovels, and wet burlap sacks. Women gathered supplies, bandages, salves, food for the firefighters. The church bell rang continuously, calling every able-bodied person to help. "McCrae," Tom Bennett called out, his face streaked with soot. "It's bad. Started in the dry gulch and spread fast. Wind's pushing it straight toward your timber." Silas jumped down from the wagon, already rolling up his sleeves. "How close?" "Close enough. We need every hand we can get." As the men organized their firefighting efforts, Eliza noticed a cluster of women near the general store, their faces hard with judgment even in crisis. Mrs. Patterson, the boarding house owner who'd turned Eliza away months ago, spoke loud enough to be overheard. "Divine retribution. If you ask me, man takes in a fallen woman, flouts all decency, and look what happens. The Lord's judgment is swift." "Aye," another woman agreed. "Brings shame on the town, and now we all suffer for it." The words hit Eliza like physical blows. She'd grown stronger under Silas's protection, but the old wounds were still tender. For a moment, she wanted to run. From the judgment, from the fire, from the possibility that her presence had somehow brought this disaster. Then Martha's voice cut through the poisonous whispers. "The only shame here is women standing idle while their neighbors fight to save the town. If your tongues worked as hard as your hands should, we'd have this fire out already." She bustled over to Eliza, pressing a bundle of medical supplies into her hands. "Don't you listen to those harpies. Fire's been building in that dry timber for years. Has nothing to do with you or Silas or anything but drought and lightning. They think with their prejudices, not their minds." Martha's voice was fierce. "Now come on, we've got work to do." The women set up a makeshift aid station at the edge of town, ready to treat burns and smoke inhalation. As the afternoon wore on, men began returning, some for fresh water, others bearing injuries. Eliza worked steadily, cleaning wounds, applying salves, offering water to parched throats. She was bandaging a burned hand when she heard someone say Silas's name. Her head snapped up, scanning the crowd of soot-blackened faces. "McCrae's still out there," Jim Morrison reported, coughing heavily. "Wouldn't leave. Says if his investment burns, he'll watch it go. Stubborn fool's trying to cut a fire break single-handed." Fear closed around Eliza's throat. Without thinking, she grabbed a water bucket and started toward the smoke. Martha caught her arm. "What are you doing?" "He's out there alone." Eliza's voice was steady despite her racing heart. "Someone needs to make him see sense. It's dangerous. Everything's dangerous." She pulled free gently but firmly. Loving someone, trusting them, letting them into your heart, it's all dangerous. But we do it anyway. Martha's expression softened. "You love him?" It wasn't a question, but Eliza answered anyway. "I think I might, and I won't lose another man to pride in mountains, even mountains of fire." She ran toward the smoke before anyone could stop her. The heat hit her like a wall as she neared the fire line. Men shouted at her to go back, but she pushed forward, following directions to where Silas was last seen. She found him in a small clearing, frantically digging a trench around a stand of young pines. His shirt was gone, his face and chest black with soot, his hands bleeding from the rough work. Silas. He spun around, eyes wild. "Eliza, what are you doing here? Get back." "Not without you." She thrust the water bucket at him. "Drink. The trees are just trees." She grabbed his arm, feeling the tremor of exhaustion in his muscles. "They're not worth your life. They're all I have to build with. The future. The future is nothing if you're not in it." The words came out fierce and desperate. "Do you think I care about timber or investments or any of it? Do you think any of that matters if you don't come home?" He stared at her, something shifting in his soot-streaked face. "Home." Yes, home. Our home. The one where you promised to be patient, to wait as long as I needed. How can you keep that promise if you die fighting a fire that's already won? A burning branch crashed down nearby, sending up a shower of sparks. The fire was closing in, the heat becoming unbearable. Please, Eliza said, her voice breaking. I've already lost one man I loved. Don't make me survive that again. The words hung between them for a moment, crystalline despite the chaos. Then Silas dropped his shovel and took her hand. You love me, he asked, even as they began running from the advancing flames. Is now really the time for this conversation? Despite everything, the danger, the smoke, the loss of his investment burning behind them, Silas actually smiled. Seems as good a time as any. They ran together, hands clasped, dodging burning debris and jumping over smoldering logs. Other firefighters had pulled back, creating a larger firebreak that might save the town even if the timber was lost. They stumbled into the relative safety of the new line, where men immediately doused them with water to cool their heated skin and wash away embers. Of all the fool things, Tom Bennett said, but his tone held relief rather than real anger. Both of you could have died. But we didn't. Silas kept hold of Eliza's hand, anchoring her to his side. We're both here. The fight continued through the night, but by dawn the wind had shifted, pushing the fire back on itself where it began to burn out on the already blackened ground. Dust Hollow was saved, though Silas's timber investment was completely destroyed. As the exhausted townspeople gathered in the early morning light, sharing water and what food the women had prepared, Reverend Mills approached Silas and Eliza where they sat on the church steps. I owe you an apology, he said stiffly. Both of you. You worked as hard as anyone to save this town, despite how some of us have treated you. Fire doesn't care about reputation, Silas said simply. Neither does courage. The Reverend nodded and moved away, but his words had been heard. Throughout the morning, other townspeople approached, some to thank them, others to offer help rebuilding what was lost. The shared danger had shifted something in the community's perception, reminding them that gossip mattered less than character when survival was at stake. As they finally headed home in the wagon, exhausted and filthy, but alive, Eliza leaned against Silas's shoulder. I'm sorry about your timber. It can be replaced, maybe not this year or next, but eventually. He pressed a kiss to her soot-stained hair. You can't be. When I saw you out there, refusing to leave. She shuddered. I understood how you must have felt when Mary was sick. The helplessness, the fear. But you came anyway. Of course I did. She straightened to look at him. That's what you do when you love someone. You show up, even when it's dangerous. Especially when it's dangerous. So you meant it what you said by the trees. Every word. Silas pulled the wagon to a stop, right there on the empty road with the sunrise painting the sky pink and gold. Eliza Jane Rowe, you appeared in my barn like a gift I didn't know I needed. You brought life back to my home and hope back to my heart. I know we said we'd go slow, but after yesterday, life's too short and too uncertain for excessive caution. What are you saying? I'm saying I love you. I'm saying I want you to stay not as my housekeeper, but as my wife. If you'll have me, I'm saying that sometimes the best things come from the worst circumstances, and maybe we're proof of that. Eliza touched his face, tracing the lines that exhaustion and worry had etched there. The town will talk. Let them. They'll talk anyway. I'm still the woman who lived with a man unwed. You're the woman who faced down a wildfire to save the man she loves. That's all that matters to me. She thought of all the reasons to say no, the gossip that would never fully die, the judgment that would follow them, the risk of losing love again to the dangerous uncertainty of frontier life. Then she thought of mornings in the kitchen, evenings by the fire, and the steady presence of this man who'd seen her at her lowest and still found her worthy of respect and love. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I'll marry you, Silas McCrae. He kissed her then, there on the dusty road with the smell of smoke still in the air, and their clothes ruined beyond repair. It was nothing like the romantic moments in the novels Isaac used to read to her. It was better because it was real, born from trial and tested by fire. When they finally made it home, the house stood unchanged, a sanctuary from the chaos of the night, as they washed away the soot and tended each other's burns. Eliza marveled at how different everything felt. The rooms were the same, but her place in them had transformed, no longer a guest or employee, but truly home. When? Silas asked as they sat on the porch, watching the distant smoke dissipate. Soon, Eliza replied, before the town finds something new to disapprove of. He laughed, the sound rich despite his exhaustion. With us, they might never run out of material. Then we'll give them something worth talking about. A marriage built on choice rather than necessity, on love rather than convention. To scandal, Silas said, raising his coffee cup in a mock toast. To survival, Eliza countered, touching her cup to his, and to finding home in the most unexpected places. The sun climbed higher, burning away the smoke and revealing a clear blue sky. The timber was gone, but the land remained. The gossips would whisper, but love had grown despite their poison. And two people who'd thought their best chapters were behind them discovered that sometimes the story was just beginning. The morning after the fire, Eliza found Silas standing in the doorway of the spare room, the room that had been hers for months but suddenly felt like foreign territory. Their declaration of love and impending marriage had shifted everything, leaving them both uncertain about the practical arrangements of their daily life. I was thinking, he said, not quite meeting her eyes. Maybe we should do things proper now. I could move my things to the barn until the wedding. Wouldn't want to give people more cause to. Silas McCrae, you will do no such thing. Eliza set down the shirt she'd been mending. We've shared this house honorably for months. I won't have you sleeping with the horses now just to appease gossips who've already made up their minds about us. But with things changed between us, the only thing that's changed is we've spoken aloud what's been growing for weeks. She stood, crossing to where he lingered in the doorway. I trust you. You trust me. That's enough. He caught her hand, pressing it briefly to his lips. You're a remarkable woman, Eliza Rowe. I'm a practical woman who knows that appearances matter less than truth. Now go wash up for breakfast. The biscuits won't keep themselves warm. As they settled back into their routine, news of their engagement rippled through Dust Hollow like water through a broken dam. The reactions were mixed, some, like Martha and the Bennetts, offered genuine congratulations. Others maintained their disapproval, though it was harder to voice after witnessing their courage during the fire. It was 3 days later when an unexpected visitor arrived. Eliza was beating rugs on the porch when she saw the rider approaching. A woman, riding alone with the confidence of someone used to solitude. As she drew closer, Eliza recognized her with a start. Clara Morrison, the doctor's wife, known for her fierce independence and equally fierce tongue. Mrs. Morrison. Eliza set down the rug beater, suddenly conscious of her work-worn dress and dusty apron. Soon to be Mrs. McCrae. I hear. Clara dismounted with easy grace despite her 50-odd years. Thought it was time we had a talk. Eliza's stomach tightened. Clara Morrison's opinion carried weight in Dust Hollow. If she'd come to voice disapproval. Would you like to come in? I have fresh coffee. Coffee would be welcome. Clara tied her horse and followed Eliza inside, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the spotless kitchen. You've done wonders with this place. It was becoming a tomb before you arrived. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Eliza and Silas had shared so many meals and conversations. Clara sipped her coffee thoughtfully before speaking. I knew Mary McCrae well. We started the church auxiliary together. worked side by side at countless barn raisings and harvests. She was a good woman. I've heard nothing but good about her, Eliza said carefully. She was also dying inside for want of a child. Clara's directness was startling. 8 years of marriage, 8 years of monthly disappointment. It wore on her, though she never complained. Silas wanted to adopt, but Mary couldn't bear the thought. Said if God didn't see fit to bless her with her own, she'd accept the lack. Eliza said nothing, unsure where this was leading. I'm telling you this because people have been comparing you to Mary, and that's unfair to both of you. Clara set down her cup with a decisive clink. Mary was my friend, but she was also human. She had virtues and flaws like anyone. What matters is that Silas loved her, mourned her properly, and is now ready to love again. That should be celebrated, not condemned. Not everyone sees it that way. Not everyone has sense. Clara leaned forward. I've lived in this town for 30 years, seen good women destroyed by gossip and bad women elevated by wealth, seen men praised for sins that would damn a woman forever. The measuring stick isn't fair. Never has been. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small package. This was Mary's. She gave it to me before she died. Said to keep it for... Well, she said I'd know when to pass it on. Eliza unwrapped the package carefully. Inside was a delicate gold thimble, engraved with tiny flowers. She taught me to sew, Clara explained. Said every woman needed a skill that was hers alone, something that couldn't be taken away. I think she'd want you to have this. Not because you're replacing her. You're not. But because you're giving Silas what she couldn't in her final months. A future. Tears pricked Eliza's eyes. I don't know what to say. Say you'll use it well. Say you'll be happy. Say you'll ignore the bitter tongues that have nothing better to do than judge others. Clara stood. Her message delivered. And say you'll join the church auxiliary. We could use someone with your backbone. After Clara left, Eliza sat holding the thimble, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness. When Silas came in for the noon meal, he found her still at the table, the small golden object cupped in her palm. What's that? He asked, then listened quietly as she explained Clara's visit. Mary would have liked you, he said finally. You're different as day and night in some ways, but in the things that matter, strength, kindness, determination, you're cut from the same cloth. I'm not trying to replace her, Silas. I know. And I'm not trying to replace Isaac with you. We're building something new, the four of us. 4. You, me, and the memory of who we loved before. They're part of us. Denying that would be like denying our own hearts. That evening, they walked to the small cemetery at the edge of town. Silas led her to Mary's grave, marked with a simple stone that read, Beloved Wife. The wild flowers he'd planted there in spring were blooming, purple and gold against the prairie grass. Mary, he said quietly, this is Eliza. She's brought life back to our home. I think you'd want to know that the house is full of laughter again, that your garden is thriving, that the quilts you made keep someone warm. I'll always love you, always miss you, but I'm ready to live again, and I wanted you to know. Eliza knelt and placed a small bouquet of flowers from the garden on the grave. I'll take care of him, she whispered, and the home you built together, I promise. They stood in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of rose and amber. Then Silas took her hand and they walked home together, past the scorched fields where his timber investment had burned, past the town where tongues still wagged, to the house that had become their sanctuary. That night, Eliza used Mary's thimble for the first time, working on her wedding dress. She'd decided against white that was for first-time brides with unblemished reputations. Instead, she'd chosen a soft blue, the color of prairie sky after storm clouds passed. It was a dress for a woman who'd weathered loss and judgment, who'd learned that love could come more than once if you were brave enough to accept it. Silas watched from his chair, pretending to read but really studying the way lamplight caught in her hair. the slight furrow of concentration between her brows, the gentle movement of her hands creating something beautiful from simple cloth. 2 weeks, he said suddenly. Until the circuit preacher comes through. Unless you'd prefer to wait. I've done my waiting, Eliza said firmly. In barns and under stars and in the cold corners of unwelcoming towns, I'm ready for warmth, for belonging, for a name that can't be taken away by circumstance. Mrs. Silas McCrae. He tested the sound of it. Eliza McCrae. It has a nice sound, she smiled, then grew serious. There will still be talk. Some people will never accept that I deserve happiness after living unwed with Isaac. Then they'll miss knowing one of the finest women I've ever met. Silas's voice was fierce with conviction. Their loss, not ours. A knock at the door interrupted them. Silas answered to find young Tommy Bennett, Tom's son, holding a covered basket. Ma sent this, the boy said, thrusting the basket at Silas. Said to tell Miss Eliza it's for the wedding cooking. Said she remembers what it's like to prepare for a wedding with no womenfolk to help. Inside the basket were preserves, pickles, and a beautiful cake pan with a note, Every bride deserves a proper cake. Welcome to the family of ranchers' wives. Sally Bennett. As the boy rode away and Silas brought the gift to the table, Eliza felt something crack open inside her chest. Not breaking, but blooming, like seeds that needed fire to germinate. The judgment would continue, but so would the kindness. The gossip would persist, but so would the gradually growing acceptance. I need to tell you something, she said suddenly, about Isaac, about our plans. Silas sat down, giving her his full attention. We were going to have children, lots of them, fill that bookshop in San Francisco with the sound of little feet. When he died, I thought that dream died too, but lately, she touched her stomach unconsciously. I know we haven't talked about it, and maybe you don't want children after what you and Mary went through, but... Eliza! He caught her hands, his eyes bright. Are you asking if I want children with you? I suppose I am. The answer is yes, whether God blesses us that way or not. Yes, we'll hope and pray and see what comes. And if it doesn't happen, we'll find other ways to fill this house with love. Orphans who need homes, or nieces and nephews, or just the two of us growing old together. All of it would be enough, as long as you're here. She kissed him then, there in the kitchen with Mary's thimble on the table and Sally Bennett's gift basket between them, with a memory of fire and judgment behind them and the promise of what might come ahead. It was a kiss that tasted of coffee and courage, of second chances and stubborn hope. 2 weeks suddenly seemed like a very long time to wait. The first snow of winter fell on their wedding day, soft flakes that transformed Dust Hollow into something almost magical. Eliza stood in the bedroom that had once been Mary's, now hers, wearing the blue dress she'd sewn with trembling fingers and steadfast hope. Martha fussed with the wildflowers woven into her hair, while Sally Bennett adjusted the simple veil borrowed from her own wedding. You're beautiful, Martha declared, stepping back to admire her handiwork, like a woman who's earned her happiness. Through the window, Eliza could see townsfolk gathering at the small church. More had come than she'd expected. The fire had shifted something in the community's heart, reminding them that courage mattered more than convention. Ready? Sally asked gently. Eliza took a breath that seemed to reach all the way to her toes. I've been ready since the day he asked me my name instead of telling me to leave. The walk to church was short, but felt eternal. Tom Bennett had offered to escort her, standing in for the father she'd lost years ago. As they approached the church doors, she heard him murmur, Silas is a lucky man. Don't let anyone tell you different. Inside, candles flickered against the winter gloom. The pews were nearly full. Ranchers and their wives, townspeople who'd gradually accepted what they couldn't change, even some who'd initially condemned. At the altar stood Silas, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday best but radiating a joy that made her heart skip. Reverend Mills, who'd once come to chase her away, now waited to bind them together. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, but grace had a way of softening even the hardest hearts. As she walked down the aisle, Eliza caught glimpses of faces. Clara Morrison nodding approval, Martha dabbing at tears, the owner of the general store who'd once served her in stony silence now offering a tentative smile. But mostly she saw Silas, his gray eyes fixed on her like she was the answer to every prayer he'd forgotten how to voice. When Tom placed her hand in Silas's, the warmth of that simple contact spread through her entire being. This was right, after all the cold nights, closed doors, and cruel whispers. This moment of choosing and being chosen was absolutely right. Dearly beloved, Reverend Mills began, his voice carrying new respect. We gather today to witness something precious. Two people who've walked through shadow choosing to step into light together. The ceremony was simple. They'd written no elaborate vows, made no grand declarations. When prompted, Silas spoke from his heart. Eliza, you came into my life when I'd forgotten why morning was different from night. You brought warmth to a cold house and purpose to empty days. I promised to shelter you not just from winter storms, but from the harder winds of judgment and sorrow. I promised to see you always as I saw you that first morning, as someone worthy of kindness, respect, and love. Eliza's voice shook only slightly as she responded, Silas, you gave me sanctuary when the world offered only closed doors. You showed me that falling doesn't mean staying down, that broken hearts can heal if given space and time. I promise to make our home a place of peace and joy. I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, knowing that together we're stronger than any storm. When Reverend Mills pronounced them husband and wife, when Silas kissed her with tender reverence before the entire town, Eliza felt something settle deep in her bones. Not just love, though that was there in abundance, but belonging, purpose, the unshakable knowledge that she was exactly where she needed to be. The reception was held in the church hall, tables groaning under the weight of food the townswomen had prepared. Even those who'd whispered behind their hands had contributed, as if the act of bringing potato salad or apple pie could ease their earlier cruelty. As Eliza moved through the crowd on Silas's arm, accepting congratulations and well wishes, she noticed a young woman standing alone by the door. Her clothes were travel-worn, her face gaunt with the particular exhaustion Eliza knew too well. Their eyes met across the room, recognition passing between them like lightning. Here was another woman running from judgment, searching for somewhere to rest. Eliza excused herself and approached the stranger. Are you hungry? There's plenty of food. The woman's eyes darted nervously. I shouldn't be here. I heard music and... She turned to leave. Wait. Eliza caught her sleeve gently. What's your name? Rose Cartwright. The name came reluctantly, as if she expected it to be used against her. Are you new to Dust Hollow? Rose. Just passing through, looking for work, but... She shrugged, the gesture containing volumes. Eliza glanced back at Silas, who was watching with understanding in his eyes. He nodded slightly, reading her thought before she voiced it. My husband and I have a ranch 3 miles west. Eliza said, we could use help. Fair wages, clean room, honest work. No questions about where you've been. Rose's eyes filled with tears she was too proud to shed. Why would you... Because someone once found me sleeping in a barn and asked if I'd eaten instead of asking me to leave. Eliza smiled, remembering, sometimes that's all it takes to change everything. They settled the details quickly. Rose would come to the ranch tomorrow, would help with the growing household work, would have the chance Eliza had been given. As the young woman slipped away to find lodging for one more night, Martha appeared at Eliza's elbow. That was well done, she said quietly. Though people will talk. Let them. I've learned that gossip has less power when you refuse to let it guide your choices. The celebration continued as snow fell heavier outside. Silas spun her around the makeshift dance floor, both of them laughing at their clumsy attempts at formal steps. When they finally took their leave amid a shower of good wishes and only a few lingering, disapproving looks, Eliza felt as if she were floating. The ride home was quiet, the world muffled by snow. Silas had heated stones wrapped in cloth to warm her feet, had tucked blankets around her with tender care. When they reached the ranch, he lifted her down from the wagon, then surprised her by sweeping her up into his arms. "Silas McCrae, what are you doing?" "Carrying my wife over the threshold of our home," he said, grinning despite the strain. "Some traditions are worth keeping." He set her down just inside the door, in the kitchen where she'd cooked countless meals as his housekeeper. Everything looked the same. The stove she'd learned to coax, the table where they'd shared careful conversations, the window overlooking the garden now dormant under snow. Yet everything was different. "Welcome home, Mrs. McCrae," Silas said softly. "I've been home for months," she replied, reaching up to touch his face. "I just didn't have the right name for it." Later, as they sat before the fire, still in their wedding clothes but with shoes kicked off and propriety relaxed, Eliza pulled out a small wrapped package. "I have something for you," she said, suddenly shy. Inside was a shirt she'd sewn in secret, fine work with careful stitches. Embroidered on the pocket was a small design, mountains and stars intertwined. "It's beautiful," Silas said, tracing the embroidery. "What does it mean?" "Mountains for what we've survived, stars for what we're building together. They make a life." He kissed her then, long and sweet, with all the promise of years to come. When they finally parted, he said, "I have something for you too." He handed her an envelope. Inside was a deed half-ownership of the ranch, her name written clearly beside his. "Silas, I don't need—" "Yes, you do. You need to know that this is yours, legally and completely, that no one can ever make you leave, no matter what happens to me. This is your home, Eliza, now and always." The tears came then, healing tears that washed away the last of her fear. She was no longer the woman sleeping in barns, no longer the one turned away from every door. She was Eliza McCrae, rancher's wife, with her name on a deed and her feet firmly planted on her own land. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in fresh white. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Running a household with Rose, facing whatever gossip arose from their charity, building a life and maybe a family on the ashes of their losses. But tonight, in the warmth of their home, with rings on their fingers and hope in their hearts, they had everything they needed. "No one lets me sleep indoors," Eliza murmured, remembering those desperate words from months ago. "What's that?" Silas asked, already drowsy from the long day. "Nothing, just thinking how far we've come." "Far enough to know we're home," he replied, pulling her closer. And they were, not just in the physical walls that sheltered them, but in the choice to open their hearts again despite the risk, to build something new from the rubble of what was lost. In choosing each other, they'd chosen to believe that love could bloom more than once, that second chances were not consolation prizes but gifts in their own right. As the fire burned low and snow sealed them into their own private world, Eliza McCrae closed her eyes and smiled. She was warm. She was loved. She was home. And that was everything. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're enjoying this tale. Please comment below and share your thoughts about Eliza and Silas's journey. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like and hit that hype button to help more people discover these tales of love, loss, and redemption in the American frontier. Your support means the world to me.